Hello everyone, and welcome to A Few Good Frames. Today we're going to be looking at Arrival by cinematographer Bradford Young and colorist Joe Gawler. So Bradford Young used the Kowa Cine lenses. They are a 1960 Japanese cinema lens, and they're described as being sharp on the center, but with medium to low contrast. So potentially you're going to get more details in your shadows and highlights. Some of these special characteristics, they're described as having a unique bokeh pattern. We'll see if we can spot some of that in these images. And they're said to have a gold and amber lens flare, thanks to a gold single layer coating. So we'll see if there's some characteristics of that in the flares that show up in Arrival. It says they're slightly cool in color, so we'll see if we can kind of tweak the white balance back to what would be natural, or see if Joe Gawler already kind of called for that. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of the technical aspects that went into Arrival, let's look at some of the frames and what they're doing creatively, and see if we can figure out how they're pushing the image, so that if you wanted to mimic this kind of style, you could be on the right direction. So I've made a couple of corrections to each of these frames that I've selected to take a look at today. And I've done that only in an effort to show you where they pushed the image from potentially where it was in the beginning. This could be something that Bradford Young put into each of the frames, and Joe Gawler didn't have to do too much. Or it could have been that, Joe Gawler created the look more in post. It's hard to say. But let's take a look at what the image looks like in the movie, which is this right here. And there's a couple things I want to talk about, and the first one's exposure, the second one's color. So let's just activate the exposure node that I've created here. Yeah, okay, just the exposure node here. I should label this. So in each of these frames, I have exposure and color that I've partially corrected. So before this node, these are the levels we're looking at, which are extraordinarily dark, even on a daytime exterior. The face, you have around like 30 IRE, which is pretty non-standard for a shot like this. Here, let me see if I can find exactly what it is. So the face, you have just under 50 IRE, which is really dark. The levels are really down. So that's kind of step one, is embracing that log look where you don't have anything touching black, you don't have anything touching white. Everything's kind of just sitting in the middle, and it's really desaturated. So that's the first step when looking at these frames. What I've done is just added contrast to see what the image could have been if you were going for like a standard look, if you're trying to correct it based on the waveform. And what I've also done is added a layer for color, because there is a consistent theme among all of these frames, and that is they're all pushed green and yellow. So the temperature is pushing warm, the tint is pushing green. So I'll show you guys kind of how that unfolds in these frames. But this right here was before and after. Before, you can see it particularly in the skin. It's really green and warm. And then just the general background back here. And then corrected. Introduce some more pink and blue. For this image, it's a little bit tricky to add any kind of exposure adjustment. Let me see if I can attempt one. All I'm working with is contrast and pivot. But there you go. So same thing. We're really flat in these frames, and it really helps to establish the tone that they're trying to go for here. So if you were developing your own LUT or wanted your footage to look kind of in the same vein of what they're going for. Just everything real low, everything really kind of desaturated, not too much contrast. And then same thing for the color. Let me full screen this. So this is what I've kind of corrected it to. This is what it looked like in the movie. And actually, this is what it looked like in the movie. So everything's very, very green, which just helps to add to that kind of feeling of dread that they're establishing extremely well in these frames. Same thing, daytime exterior. This was before any kind of exposure correction. I'll cut off both of these. So same thing, levels are really low. Contrast is low. Really helps to establish the mood that they have in the movie. But if you wanted to correct it, you'd have something similar to this. And then for the colors, so particularly in the skin up here, this is before. This is how it appeared in the movie. Everything's very green and corrected. So everything's pushing green. Everything is pushing yellow. But it looks really nice in these frames. Same thing for this right here. This is as it appeared in the movie. And then exposure adjustment. And then color adjustment here. Full screen it. This is before color adjustment. You can see the light coming through here. It's very green. There's green on these walls. Everything's just very green and adjusted back to more of a neutral. And once again, this isn't to say that there's one's better than the other. It's just if you were looking to develop a frame that looked like this, you would have it pushed a little bit more to the green, pushed a little bit more to the a little bit warmer. This one doesn't really apply because it's a single light source here, and it's supposed to look a little bit blue. So let's jump here. So exact same thing. This is as it appeared in the movie. The levels are way far down. If you look at the waveform, it's all living in the bottom. 10 to 20 IRE. Then just a basic correction. So the exposure here, all it is contrast and pivot. That's it. And then right here with the color, green, especially up in these clouds. It's just a lot of green and yellow. And corrected, this is a little bit more neutral. And then for shots like this, particularly with the tent, I'm having to push it pretty far toward magenta and bring the temperature pretty far down as well. But really nice what they're doing here to establish this tone. Same thing here. So looking as it appeared in the movie, very warm, very green. You can see it on the back walls behind her. Very green up in here. Then you go to correct it with just a basic contrast node. Just what it could have looked like, given to somebody else. Right there. And then with the color. So with the contrast, it's the color as it appeared in the movie. Like beautiful and gold. But if you wanted to correct it, just put a little blue. And the tint goes up just a little bit toward magenta. So if you were to develop a LUT to try to mimic this to monitor on set, what you could do is either just have the temperature a little bit warmer, or you could always just set it properly and then just put a monitor LUT. Develop a tint that's a little bit greener and push the temperature a little bit more toward gold. And the same thing here for this frame. As it appeared in the movie, levels are down. Everything's super dark. Boom. little bit of contrast, and then correcting the colors just a tad. And the exact same thing here. It works for all these frames. Before and after. Before, everything's super green up here in the clouds, down here in the grass. There's a lot of green, especially back here. And then corrected. And exposure. So if you wanted to add exposure like this, it looks equally as good having everything really down, but it looks a little bit dreadful. That's the purpose. But if you were trying to achieve a different goal, you could always boost that a little bit. Same thing, this is just exposure here. This is as it appeared in the movie. This right here is as it appeared in the movie. This is just exposure. That's correcting the color. Same thing here. I'll cut everything off. As it appeared in the movie, everything's very green, almost black and white. And then this right here with basic corrections. Exposure, just to maximize that contrast. You don't have to have that if the movie doesn't call for it. This one didn't. This looks just as good. And then just some basic corrections. This one is meant to be a little bit more stylized, so it's a little bit more difficult to correct for it, but if you look at before and after, you can see how much green exists in the image that's released. Very green. Everything's very green and warm. So just two simple adjustments can make a massive difference in the image. And this one right here, same thing. You have basic contrast. Everything's super washed. Add a little bit of contrast, and that's what it potentially could look like. And this is your color. Very green, and very warm. And just a basic correction. And we'll look at a couple more of these just to kind of prove the point. So this is as it appeared in the movie. And just basic correction. A lot of green in his face. Correct it out slightly. And same thing here, as it appears in the movie. Here's just exposure right here. Here's just color. And then both of them together. You'll see before everything's really down, no contrast, but there's also a lot of green in the face. And then that's corrected. Same thing for this. Same thing for all these frames. So it's a really nice way to just look at two adjustments: temperature, tint, and then if you want to add contrast, you can. Just those three can really push you in the right direction. Obviously, a lot more goes into developing these shots, both on set and then in the color room. But with just those three, you can really get pushed in the right direction to something like this by dropping the contrast, adding more green in the tint, pushing the color temperature a little bit more warm. That's really going to help you get to a point like this, both in the color room and on set. So before we end this video, I'm going to do a quick test of my own theory to see if just a couple of these adjustments can create an image that's at least looks like it can live in the same world as Arrival. And so what we've done here, this is just a random shot. I'll play without any corrections. This was shot in S-Log3. Passenger in my car was taking this. And so that's the shot. And before I cut these on, I can show you guys what it would look like if corrected properly. So here's the shot. Just converted to Rec. 709 gamma 2.4 color space. So this is what it's looking like, and then I can make tinier adjustments as I see fit. But say we don't want to do that, because one of the things I preached for Arrival was kind of embracing that log look. So let's see what I've developed here and how I've done it, and then we'll compare it to some of these frames from Arrival. Okay, so the first one I did here was exposure, and all I did was tweak the contrast and the pivot. So the contrast, I bumped it up a little bit. Pivot, I adjusted it until the contrast was affecting the clouds more than anything else. And this is what our waveform is looking like. Also brought the offset down a little bit. I can bring that down even more if I wanted to embrace an even darker image. But I kind of like where the clouds are at. So actually, maybe bring that down just a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so that is our general exposure. This is before and after. So a lot of what I've done is just bringing it down. And then over here, these were my individual color channels. So let me see what I've done here. Okay, hue versus hue. I've brought the green closer to like a dark green instead of yellow, which it's hard to tell, but in these trees, just trying to introduce some of that. But it looks like my exposure adjustments are making it a little bit harder to see. And then for the sky, I've pushed it a little bit more. I've pushed some of the blue out of it. It's looking a little bit too turquoise, cyan. So I adjusted that. And then right here, it's just tint and temperature and a little bit of saturation. I can bring that down a little bit. There you go. Tint, just -20. Whatever looks green enough to pass. Temperature, just pushed a little bit of warmth into it, and that's what we're looking like before and after. So very simple adjustments for this shot right here. And compared to the shot from Arrival, obviously two massively different scenes, two different subjects. This is mostly green with the sky, and it's entirely overcast. But the colors are looking relatively close here, and about 2 minutes of correction. And then the overall levels, if you were looking at the waveform, are pretty similar, albeit flipped. Theirs is a bit higher. So what I could do is go back here, maybe boost this up a little bit more. Maybe more contrast, but favoring the highlights. I'd say that's pretty close for exposure. So really embracing the log look. Nothing close to black. And then for the colors, just pushing green and yellow. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Or if there's a particular movie you want to see analyzed, just let me know. That's about it.